at the pad. But if you're just now tuning in, no launch today afternoon. Just going to continue to stand by as this propellant comes off. We heard a call that everything was going nominally or as expected so far. And then once all the propellant's off, we should see Bob and Doug make their way out of Dragon shortly after.
And what you're seeing on your screen is a live view of Bob and Doug on the right side inside of Dragon as they're waiting for propellant to be removed from the vehicle so that it is safe for them to disarm the launch escape system. And this will take a bit of time, so we are going to stay live with you to watch this as they exit the vehicle eventually and come down from standing down on launch today.
Up until the point of the scrub, we had a really clean countdown. Weren't tracking any issues with Falcon 9 or the Dragon spacecraft, so always a good thing to see. We did have to scrub because of that weather. To be a little bit more specific, we were still in violation of one of the weather criteria. It was the strength of electric fields in the atmosphere that the 45th Space Wing and other weather operators are monitoring around the launch pad. And that's one of those rules where we need a certain amount of time if we're in a violation in this case.
Nominal, roughly 50% on stage 1 LOX and fuel, 85% on stage 2 fuel.
So the propellant offload on Falcon 9 continuing to go well. But we needed a little bit more time if we were going to be able to clear that launch weather constraint. And since we do have an instantaneous launch window today, we weren't able to make it. So we hope for better weather coming up on Saturday, where again our next launch attempt is going to be at 3:22 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll be able to go through everything. I mean, we saw them get suited up. They had a great ride out to the pad. All of their initial checks on both the suits with pressure checks and communication checks went well. Able to get the Dragon hatch closed, the launch escape system arm, and Falcon 9 started its fueling. Just not able to make a good weather window today.
And as John and I said earlier, it was just another great rehearsal today. I don't think you can get enough practice doing this. So when Saturday comes, or when the day that we can actually launch the vehicle, Bob and Doug and the NASA and SpaceX team are fully prepared with just an extra rehearsal on the belt now.
As we had talked a couple of times throughout our countdown, the weather is a lot more complex when we're launching humans. You have some more stringent requirements in place, not only around the pad, but in the case of this launch today, we were also looking at whether the entire ascent corridor, as we call it, so basically the entire way that they were flying up the east coast of the United States in this launch today, we're monitoring that weather because those are areas that if they have an ascent abort, or basically Dragon firing off of the Falcon 9 while they're flying into space, we have to make sure that conditions are good in the sea states around those areas, just so they're not going to be landing in the middle of a hurricane, which we did have a tropical storm forming right off the coast of South Carolina today, just to help complicate things a little bit.
And people might be asking, if we knew the weather was going to be a little iffy today, why continue to count down? Well, that is the reason why we do all these checks all the way to countdown. In Florida, the weather is, pretty sporadic. Sometimes a thunderstorm or hurricane will pass through. Within 20 minutes, it's gone, and we could have clear skies for a safe launch. As we continued as scheduled, standard procedure again to just continue to monitor weather all the way down to the last minutes of the count, and we see what happens. So today, unfortunately, we did scrub for weather, but we will attempt again this Saturday on May 30th.
And Dan, Jesse, a couple of things to add on there. Right now we are 11 minutes after the scrub was called. Liquid oxygen and fuel are coming off of the first stage. Hard to tell from the view. It's still a little misty around the tank because there's LOX on board. but we're between half and a third of each of the fuel and LOX tanks filled on the first stage. So propellant coming out right per plan. The second stage fuel tank is offloading. That's going slower, but it's also a smaller tank. It doesn't take very long to either load it or to offload it. The other thing that we're working on is the high-pressure helium spheres, as well as the nitrogen spheres for the landing leg system. The pressure will be brought down on those, eventually getting it down low enough to where people can re-enter the pad area. So right now, the team is preparing, once they get a permission, the SpaceX ingress-egress technician team will come back inside the caution area around the pad, make their way up when conditions are right, open up the hatch, and assist the astronauts out of the Dragon. I'd like to point out that for those who are wondering whether or not, having gone through this, putting propellant, pressurization gases on, getting fairly close to launch, whether that has done anything to wear out the Falcon 9 or the Dragon, the answer is no. If you can recall, the Falcon 9 is designed for at least 10 flights, and about time we get up to a 10th flight, we'll be doing testing to find that we probably got enough margin to continue keep flying. So this is the very first flight of a new first stage and a new second stage. So we haven't even gotten through the first flight. And in all of our margin calculations, we also take into account the fact that we may scrub a launch. So even today's operation, where we have pressurized and we have stressed the vehicle a little bit, that's taken into account in our design and our qualification testing. The other good thing is that the most stressing part of the flight for the Falcon 9 on the first stage is the re-entry. So we didn't even get through that. So we're sitting here on the pad. It's a fairly straightforward situation and not stressing on the Falcon 9. And on the Dragon spacecraft, with the human rating factors to carry crew, there is enough factors of safety, margins of safety, redundancy, that just having two people on board and closing the hatch and even pressurizing the propellant system does not eat into the margins of the
offloads continue nominally 30% on stage 1.
So right now everything's continuing to offload. The automatic sequences that we use routinely, both at the launch sites, Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, even Vandenberg Air Force Base, as well as in our Texas test site for first and second stage. Those sequences are running. Propellant is coming off of the vehicle per plan. And we see Bob and Doug up in the Dragon spacecraft, just waiting when we can get up there, open the hatch, and help them egress and come on back down the tower. And the other thought I had, Dan and Jesse, is right now we are coming up on what would have been T0, and I'm wondering 10 minutes from now whether the weather officer would turn around and say, yes, it turned good. You just didn't have a long enough window. We only had 1 second and we needed 10 minutes. So we'll have to ask offline and say, hey, did the weather conditions improve? And one thing I'll tag on to that Dan was mentioning and Jesse was talking about, the launch opportunities. The launch window does move earlier on Saturday a little bit. So it just happened to be Orbital Dynamics said today, if you want to go to the International Space Station and you want to launch northeast, which is the approved trajectory, you have to go right at 4:33, 35 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time. You pick another day, the T0 moves. It's just luck of the draw. We might have been doing this at 8 in the morning when we were getting lightning, or we could have been doing it a few hours from now when conditions may have been acceptable. So in the end, we can all look at Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler for orbital dynamics telling us when do we launch, and that stuck us right in the middle of a period of bad weather. So there's my science lesson for today, Dan and Jesse.
Appreciate that, John. That helps soften the blow of just moving past that T-0 time. But for anybody, if you're just now tuning in, wondering why Falcon